Information fueled.
Opinion driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
8:06, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on in to Wednesday, January 15th. President-elect Donald Trump, he has posted this to the socials. For far too long, we've relied on taxing our great people using the Internal Revenue Service. Through soft and pathetically weak trade agreements, the American economy has delivered growth and prosperity to the world while taxing ourselves. The president saying it is time for that to change. And he says, I am today announcing that I will create the External Revenue Service to collect our tariffs, duties, and all revenue that come from foreign sources. We'll begin charging those who make money off of us with trade, and they'll start paying, finally, their fair share. January 20th of 2025 will be the birth date of the External Revenue Service. Make America great again. EJ Antoni is joining us. You've seen him on Fox News. He also works with the Heritage Foundation, and he's been on with me a time or two, and always great to have you back. EJ, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Dan. How are you doing this morning?
Good. So, 5 days or so and counting, the External Revenue Service. You've heard me talk about the president-elect's post. It sounds like he's talking about collecting tariffs and so forth. Is there anything more to this than that I'm not getting?
Well, I got to say, I absolutely love this idea. And part of the reason is that I think it's going to help us streamline what things like Customs and Border Enforcement already do. And I'm really hopeful that actually we're going to be able to essentially transform that agency back to what it originally was, which was an arm of the Treasury designed to collect all of these revenues from foreign sources. And look, the other thing that's important to remember here, this is something the incoming president has talked about quite a bit, is America's golden age. That was a time when we had our fastest rates of sustained economic growth. And what did the government use to finance itself? It didn't use income taxes. That didn't even exist. That didn't come into effect until 1913. Yes, it was a temporary wartime measure during the Civil War, but that was basically a one-off. During the rest of that time period, the government financed itself through tariffs almost exclusively. And so I think anything we can do to get us back to that winning formula of no income taxes, or at least less income taxes, and more reliance on tariffs, that's a good thing.
It is really interesting, the conversation on tariffs. And you and I spoke about this at greater length earlier, a couple months ago, I think, about America's past and the use of tariffs and how the government funded America utilizing those tariffs. You said something previously that I thought was really interesting, and that was that if America, we are a huge market, we are a huge economy. And so if the likes of China and Europe and some of these nations, if they want access to our markets and our economy and our people and our wallets, then, yeah, they have to pay tariffs. Is there a worry that they're just going to pass along the cost to the American people, because that is what the Democrats say? So they'll say, well, if you're going to charge, a 20% tariff, then the people of America can look forward to 20% rise in prices.
Well, let's just look at domestic markets for a second, because I think that can make it a little easier to understand. Let's say you're going to impose a new retail tax, but you're only going to impose it on Walmart and not Amazon. And so Walmart has to raise their prices to pass that along to the American consumer. But what does Amazon do? They just keep their prices the same, and they start stealing market share. So the American consumer is just simply going to switch. Maybe they pay a little bit more because the prices on Amazon might be a little bit higher than they would be if the consumer went to Walmart to buy their stuff. But at the end of the day, most of that increase is going to get eaten by Walmart, because Walmart will not actually respond by just passing on all of the cost to the American consumer, because, again, otherwise they'll lose all that market share to Amazon. So what Walmart has to do is maybe raise their prices only a little bit so that they're in line fine with Amazon now, but they're not going to be able to pass everything on. Otherwise, again, they lose all their market share. Walmart ends up eating a lot of those costs. This is exactly what we saw during the first Trump administration, by the way, where 81 cents on the dollar of all the tariffs that we put onto China were actually eaten by Chinese producers. Only 19 cents on the dollar was passed on to the American consumer. And again, if you're going to trade a dollar for dollar in terms of revenue here between tariffs and income taxes, that means for every dollar you reduce Americans' income taxes, you're only going to raise their tariff costs by 19 cents about. That's a great deal for Americans.
So when we talk about President Trump coming in, utilizing tariffs, extending the Trump tax cuts, and doing all the things that he wants to do, how long before prices start to go down?
Well, actually, you could get energy prices down very, very quickly, I think. And the reason for that is because much of the strangling that we have seen of energy markets the last 4 years under Biden has not actually demonstrably affected infrastructure. For example, we have a lot of wells that are just not being used today. We have infrastructure at refineries that's simply been mothballed. So it's not as if you need to drill, you need to explore and drill a new well. It's not as if you need to build a whole new refinery. Those are things that take years, sometimes decades. We have a lot of that infrastructure. It's just not being used because the tax and regulatory regime that energy markets face today is so onerous compared to where it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. So all of this means that if you simply can send a signal, which I think Trump is already doing, to energy markets that you're going to have a much more favorable tax and regulatory regime in the near future, then what ends up happening is they will start increasing production today.
One of the things, and I'm going to have to take a traffic break, but let me tee it up now. One of the things, and I covered this extensively yesterday, is in the Senate, they're already talking about deregulating America. You'll recall that when Trump came into office the first time, the goal, if I remember correctly, was to eliminate 2 regulations for each regulation that was introduced as a new regulation. Now that number is 3. 3 regulations have to go for one new regulation that is introduced, and they have to be equal in monetary value. I want to talk about what that's going to do to the American economy, because you touched on energy. So I think that this, obviously, that conversation segues into regulations. So we're going to talk about that straight ahead. 8:15, time to check the roads on WTN. Weather today, a high of 39 and sunny skies. Right now, 23 degrees. Super Talk 99.7 WTN. EJ Antoni is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. So how big of a deal will it be if the Senate and the House and Donald Trump are going to be able to cut the regulations as much as they want to cut them?
Oh, I think it'll be absolutely massive. And fortunately, now that we have the recent Supreme Court ruling, I believe it was West Virginia EPA, in that instance, what they essentially did was gut something called Chevron deference, which is what regulators have relied on literally for years in order to massively increase the regulatory state. And so we're now at a point where you can essentially deregulate, do away with a lot of these old provisions without actually having to go through Congress. So I'm trying to say that the executive branch can do a tremendous amount of deregulating now on their own. And I think that this is a particularly good sign given the people that we are seeing at places like OIRA, also given the fact that Casey Mulligan, a University of Chicago economics professor, he's now in his new role that was just recently announced, he's basically going to be the deregulatory czar in the Trump administration. And one of the reasons why I'm so hopeful with people like him, he published a paper not that long ago showing that during the Trump administration, their deregulatory efforts actually saved American families, on average, $2,500 a year per year during the 4 years of the first Trump administration. Conversely, the Biden administration has gone completely the opposite direction, adding over $10,000 in regulatory costs to the average American family. So they are really going to, I think, double down on their deregulatory efforts. And now, again, with that recent Supreme Court ruling, they have essentially clearance to go whole hog on this.
I thought that Chevron deference, and it's really interesting and I've been talking about this for a long time, but for people who don't understand it, basically it meant that if you ended up in court with a government agency over some sort of regulation and its interpretation, the court had to give deference to the government. So your court battle with the government, you were already losing before you even walked in the door.
Right, 100%, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Dan. And so the reason why this really helps with the deregulatory efforts is the folks who are in charge of that deregulation can now simply point to that court ruling and say, look, all of these things that we have been doing as regulators in the past, things like imposing these hyper stringent efficiency requirements on home appliances, things that sound good but actually don't have a net benefit on consumers because they make the appliances so incredibly costly. Things of that nature, the new regulators can come in and say, hey, we never actually had the authority to do this in the first place, so we're now going to roll back those regulations. We're no longer going to impose these requirements on Maytag, on Whirlpool, on LG, on Samsung, and these other corporations that make your clothes washer, your dishwasher, your clothes dryer, your refrigerator, your furnace, etc.
8:18, Nashville's Morning News. EJ Antoni is joining us. All right, EJ, I've got 1 minute left. Joe Biden released his farewell letter, and in it relating to the economy, Joe Biden says, today, we have the strongest economy in the world and have created a record 16.6 million new jobs. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. And he's, it seems to me like he's gaslighting America again. But 60 seconds, EJ, give me an encapsulation of Joe Biden's economy.
Oh my goodness, this man does not live in reality. We literally just got inflation numbers out this morning showing that the monthly increase in prices for December last month was the fastest since March. It's a 4.8% annualized rate. Prices are rising 2 to 3 times as fast right now as they did before Biden took office. I mean, that's an absolute joke. It's a flat out lie, really. And look at the jobs numbers. A huge percentage of that increase that he cites was simply the economy reopening, people getting their jobs back after the closures related to COVID. And on top of that, another large percentage is simply the government hiring more people. It's not actually the productive private sector growing. There's more people working for the government today than ever before.
All right, EJ Antoni, great to have you on as always. Dan Mandis here, 8:20 on Nashville's Morning News. Big news for my friends at DT McCall's. If you've been thinking about buying a gun safe, but you've been putting it off, now is your time because gun safes are sales tax free right now at DT McCall's. They are the largest Liberty Safe dealer here in the state of Tennessee. Why? Well, it's free delivery and free setup. A lot of these other places are going to charge you $500 at least for delivery and setup in bigger models, $300 in smaller models. But at DT McCall & Sons, they are going to deliver every safe for free every time, period. And no setup charge either. So many reasons to love my place, DT McCall's. Save some big bucks right now on your Liberty gun safe when you shop at your local DT McCall's. Go to dtmccalls.com for locations and information. 5 locations across Middle Tennessee: Carthage, Cookeville, Lebanon, Lafayette, and Franklin. Always online. Tell them Dan Mandis told you to reach out. dtmccalls.com. It is 8:21 on Nashville's Morning News. Joan Jones has the news at 8:30. Joan, what's coming up?
Reading, writing, and cocaine. A middle school teacher is under arrest. We'll also tell you, what Kamala Harris has refused to do to welcome the new vice president's family to Washington. Wait till you hear this story. That's coming up at 8:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.